Hi everyone, welcome back to Quarantine with Brennifry. Today we're going to be talking about Avatar, The Legend of Korra, and a little bit of Avatar Last Airbender. As always, I'm Tori, and this week's been a doozy. It was my last school of the semester ended, and so on Friday, so it's been just like grading, and just like almost done, just waiting on a few straggler papers that I gave extensions for, and then freedom, summer vacation, even though summer school started 2 weeks ago at a different school. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. Summer is here. I'm very happy. I could use the break. Semester was hard. COVID-19 was hard on instructing and teaching and maintaining 250 humans. But we did it. We're here. We made it through. I've convinced so many students not to drop out of school, which makes me feel good because so many were like, I'm just gonna quit. And I'm like, no, you're not. It's called taking a semester off, right? And then you're coming back. Or you just take one class. It's okay. We're here for you. Anyways, my share of the week is my favorite little goblin, Gunk. He is from a Dungeons and Dragons campaign I was in with my friend. My friend played a character named Gunk, and he was a goblin druid who couldn't speak common, which is like English. We had this running stint. I was a princess. I played a princess. Her name was Tora Del Prey. And our whole shtick was I would always try to hug him, so I'd have to roll like to hug him, but I'd always roll low and he'd always roll high to dodge me, and that was like our running joke. And as a gift, when the campaign ended, he got me a little goblin plushie. She's like, so you can finally hug Gunk. And so I have my little Gunky and I love him very much. So I'm gonna pass it on over to Brenda.
Hi everyone. So this week was intense. I did a boot camp for teaching online, and it was really intense and brutal in just the number of hours that you have to sit in front of the camera and taking the class. But I was lucky enough to take it with a friend, so anytime that I missed an instruction, my friend would clue me in, and I would do the same for her. And so that was nice. And then on my off time, because 4 hours in front of the camera was intense, I've been watching K-dramas. I finished Her Private Life last week or the week before, I can't remember. And then I started What's Wrong with Secretary Kim, and I finished that sometime this week. And then this week I started Encounter with Park Bo-gum, who is just adorable. I dare anyone to watch him and smile and then not smile. That's just not human, because he has a beautiful smile.
Is he horse guy?
Lovely. No, he's different. Okay, so with the horse drama, that ended this week, and I went through that emotional roller coaster on Friday, and that was intense. It was very happy, very much on brand with me. Timey-wimey love story. Everything is great except for the logic, right? You can't think about it too much because then it doesn't quite work. But then Jen and I came up with our own ending, and I'm totally fine thinking that that's our ending. So yeah, that's been my week. Oh, I also not started, but like in the back of my, like whenever I'm doing other work, I've had How to Train Your Dragon, Race to the Edge, which is one of my favorite animated series. Like I love Race to the Edge. It's on Netflix.
It's really cute.
Yeah, it's just, I really like it. I think it's well done. It helps you see the characters in a much more rounded way, right? You get a lot more of Astrid, you get a lot more of the twins, and it's just a lovely watch. And that's actually related to my share of the week. My little plushie, she comes inside of a dragon egg, and then when you open her up, it's Miss Stormfly. She's adorable.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I kind of want it.
I got Toothless as well because I can't get Stormfly without Toothless.
Of course.
Because in my head, I'm ignoring Hidden World, and Stormfly and Toothless are actually a couple, just like Astrid and Hiccup. So I
accept this.
Yeah.
Because who does that White Knight Fury think she is, coming in there and ruining canon?
Right? Yeah, we've had a lot of spirited debates about the White Knight Fury and how we feel about her.
It has White Knight in the name.
Yeah. But I will leave that conversation for some other day. Pass it over to Jen. How you doing this week?
Hi guys, I'm Jen. I'm doing okay. I felt like it was a long but short week, but what is time in this quarantine construct, right?
It's a colonial construct that we don't want to adhere to anyway.
Right. I can't believe like the week has gone by and the weekend has gone by even quicker on top of that. So it's crazy. I actually think went outside earlier this week with my dad, and we went out to eat, and I was just really shocked by how many people are out there not wearing masks and just like we're still in pandemic. Like there are still people out there fighting on the front lines in terms of COVID. 2 months doesn't erase the pandemic. So I'm a little worried because the governor Tori's little plushie's like
wear a mask.
Right, like the governor has like accelerated these opening plans, like now gyms and schools and nail salons I think are going to be open, and like basically everything's going to be open with restrictions at this point, right? And then like Orange County has come out with like masks are no longer required, they're just strongly recommended. It's just I was living with a parent that had COVID, so I saw that on a daily basis. Like my mom, thankfully, she is a nurse. Contracted it from her patients. I mean, thankfully, she had mild symptoms, but it was very real. It's not an imaginary thing. It's not this is going to go away in 2 weeks, or this is
I'm young and healthy.
Right. This is a pandemic. And, 2 months of quarantine, while I applaud everyone and I applaud those who are still maintaining the social distancing and like all these precautions, while I applaud all those efforts, like it's not over yet. Right. In the same way that like BLM, civil unrest and like rights and rhetoric and all these arguments and discussions is not over yet. Right. And I fear for our society that treats pandemics and like civil issues as trendy topics that are right. I kind of got diverted, but yeah, that was my week. It's just like being exposed to the outside world and then being exposed to people who are just not adhering to the mask and the social distancing policies. That really was a wake-up call for me, and just I don't think we're ready yet. And honestly, I am a little bit scared about the future moving forward.
I was invited to a restaurant today, which I declined. And my husband was like so offended and is so upset that like that is happening. That those people are going out to eat in public at a restaurant.
I think what we need to remember is that COVID-19 still doesn't have a vaccine, still doesn't have a proven treatment. The only thing that has changed is that those in power, they have gotten louder, right? And so they lobbied for reopening. And so that's the only thing that's changed. The reality of our healthcare system has not changed, right? We still don't have enough beds. We still do not have adequate treatment. We don't have a vaccine. All of these things are still there. So the rush to reopen, I understand the economic situation of that. I do. And I share the anxiety on the economic front, but we have families who are working on the front lines and who see this shit every day and are living through it, and then they're getting sick too, right? And so, I'm baffled by how willing everyone is. Like you see the images on the beaches, right? Like that bothered me on Memorial Day, right? The protesting I totally support and understand, but the not wearing a mask thing, that I don't get. I don't know.
Right.
You do Orange County, but nope, not going there.
Right. So it was an interesting on that front. In terms of what I've that aside, what I've been watching is a lot of, I decided to rewatch Madam Secretary because I just needed like a show that made sense amid all the chaos, amid all everything that's going on. And it really is a well-written show, and I just love just how characters are portrayed on that show, but also like how like romantic relationships are portrayed on that show, and just what like women in politics looks like, right? It is fiction, it is fantasy, so it's also escapism. So, but it's a really excellent, well-written show, and I think it's a well-produced show. So I do give it a strong recommend. Like Brenda, I also finished The Eternal Monarch. I'm so sad that it ended. It's not, it's not like the most logical show, but it had such a happy, I'm gonna give it a pass. If you love King Arthur, you're gonna love, like, and you're sad that like the Guinevere Arthur story didn't get like the justice that it deserved, right? Like depending, like if you're a medievalist, you're gonna just scoff your eyes and roll your eyes at what I just said. But like there's other people who grew up with just a fictionalized, bastardized versions of Arthur and Gwen, right? So like if you want justice for Arthur and Gwen in that respect, I think Eternal Monarch does give it a really nice tie-up for them as a fictional couple. But now I'm sad, like I don't know what I'm gonna watch now on a weekly basis. So I'm trying to find a new K-drama. I started Mystic Pop-Up, and that one's cute, but yeah, I don't know. And a lot of Animal Crossing. That's just like my life now, Animal Crossing. The share of the week is this.
He's so cute!
This is an Agumon plush. I'm just giving everything. And he was a gift from Brenda for like some sort of celebration, birthday or Christmas, something. We give each other a lot of gifts, so I can't remember which is which. But he's so cute. I love him so much, and pepper breath.
He's so cute.
So
you guys realize that all three of us have some form of plushie this week?
Gosh, we do.
Very true. We do love our plushies.
We do love our plushies.
So we are more than midway through our coverage of Pride Month. So we're continuing with our coverage. We are trying to choose text fictions that we are familiar with, that we've watched, that have had queer representation in them. And this is obviously a vlog about our interests and what we've watched. So the title for this week is Avatar: The Legend of Korra.
Yay!
Korra essentially is like the sequel to The Last Airbender, right? Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it was a Nickelodeon show that followed the adventures of an avatar named Korra, who essentially is able to control all four elements of the earth, right? Earth, water, fire, air, and she's the only one in the world that can control them. Every other person who does have access to some sort of bending has only access to one bending, or one main bending and then a sub bending, right? Come to find out that like metal lava bending and blood bending are things within the bending world. Right. I forgot about lightning. So
I don't know.
Yeah.
Zappy zappy.
Right. The Korra follows about like maybe like decades after Aang, who is the last avatar. She inherits the mantle, and we follow her adventures and she goes up against radicalists, she goes up against revolutionary, like anarchists, and she goes up against kingdoms and political despots. So you see the avatar is sort of that, right? A person that fights against evil, or just like, terrible people, for the good of and well-being of everyone else, right? So as always, I want to start off with first impressions, thoughts, characters. What did you guys think about Korra when you first watched her?
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed Korra. I am in the minority that prefers it to Last Airbender. I liked that it was
Among
darker.
us,
What was that?
I think among us, we're all in that minority, aren't
Are
we
we?
not?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know that Legend of Korra isn't as widely popular or as well liked as Last Airbender, but I liked the darker tone. I liked that we're not following around a bunch of 10 and 12-year-olds. We're following around people in their upper teens. I liked that about it. I enjoyed it. I thought the bending was cool. I've always been fascinated by the Avatar cycle, right? Where, each time rebirth, it goes into the next nation, right? And I've always been fascinated by, like, oh, I wonder what the Waterbender one will be like. I wonder what the Earthbender will be like. I wonder what it's just kind of fun to play that, like, ring around the rosy game, right? And because with Aang, we had access to, not Ozai. Ozai? Iroh? I don't remember. Iroh, the Firebender. So we had like a pseudo Firebender like avatar that we were exposed to because he was the one before Aang and was like guiding him spiritually, and then
Not Iroh. Iroh was the grandfather. I mean the uncle.
Uncle. Okay, I don't remember the Firebender avatar's name, but he was guiding Aang, and then so we had air, and then we jumped to Korra, who was water. So we just haven't had an earth much exposure to. But yeah, I really enjoyed Korra. I thought it was well animated. I thought the bending was really cool. I think it's really like awesome that we had like a female avatar, and that she's like she was the first avatar to be able to metal bend, which I think is like really super cool. Because Aang wasn't even able to do that. But yeah, I loved it. I liked it a lot.
So I had a very similar reaction. I love Legend of Korra much more than I do Avatar, and I say that because I really do enjoy Avatar, but The Last Airbender. But Korra was just a different level of storytelling for me. One of the very specific things that I really liked about Korra was how complicated the world became, right? Whereas with Avatar: The Last Airbender, you got maybe one or two episodes where the bad guys weren't always as obvious, right? For much of the series, it's the Fire Nation. We have to do something about the tyranny of the Fire Nation, right? And so that line was very clear. Who are the bad guys and who are we fighting? With Legend of Korra, that is so infinitely more complicated, right? Because this is a world post-revolution, right? And so you're seeing Korra trying to work with governments, but the government and the people are all like, we're over this. We don't want an avatar. You're not
old world.
You're not the great hope that you think you are. We can fend for ourselves. And so Korra is always having to challenge those ideas about like those perceptions about who she is, right? Because she's still trying to make a name for herself. She's constantly comparing herself, and others are doing the same thing, to Aang and how wonderful Aang was, right? And we saw Aang as a little kid, so it's a little bit more different for us. But with Korra, it's always her having to question too, why is she doing the things that she's doing? And is it actually the right move, right? Even though in this grand scheme of things, it's the right thing to do, it's not necessarily going to have the kind of implications and repercussions that she actually wants. So in some instances, she kind of has to let things just stop, right? And sometimes take a moment to pause and really think the things through. So I really enjoy that. I love the supporting characters that I think with Avatar: The Last Airbender, I enjoyed the supporting characters more than I did Aang, right? Like I love Toph.
I love Toph. She's like one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, same. She's perhaps one of, and I always imagine in my head, like, what if Toph had been the person to completely have raised Korra, right? What that would have been like, and how much they would have challenged each other and pushed each other's buttons. And I think that would have been wonderful to see. But you do see Toph's, is it daughter or granddaughter? I don't remember.
Daughter.
You meet both of her daughters, actually.
Too. And they're wonderful, and they challenge Korra. They're like, great, you think you're the savior because you're the avatar. Here's how you metal bend, move aside, right?
I really love that scene, what we're talking about, the daughters and Toph, where Korra has the poison metal in her, and she goes and finds Toph in the wilderness, and
Right.
Toph's like, oh, clearly my daughter tried to remove the metal. She was never that good at metal bending, and like pulls it all out, and it's like her daughter's like the second best metal bender in the world, like with Toph being the first.
But she's
And
not top is the thing, right?
like,
Well, and see, that's the thing. That's what I find really interesting
Yeah.
with Korra is, whereas a lot of people were looking to Aang, it's like, oh, you're still a kid, but you're gonna be this great person when you grow up, right? With Korra, it's like, oh, you're already an adult, but we don't really need you, right? And so I think a lot of the gender dynamics and the that she kind of has to confront as she's the airbender, I'm not the airbender, the avatar, right? It's really complicated, right? And you see her challenged in ways that Aang never was, right? And same thing with Aang. You see Aang challenged in ways that Korra never is. But I don't know. As a series as a whole, I think, except for season 2, which dragged forever, I think it was. But generally speaking, I think Korra is a stronger piece of storytelling. It's a little bit more nuanced in the way that Avatar just never was. But yeah, I first, second, and third impressions have always been favorable in favor of Korra.
Yeah. I wanted to like share share a visual of Korra for us, for those who are actually watching the video. So here I pulled up like some images of like Korra, the Legend of Korra, basically. I keep wanting to say like the last Avatar, but I just keep mixing.
Just mix the titles together.
You know what? She's the last Avatar we've seen. So.
Right, the last Avatar we've seen. Right. So, like you guys, like I came into this after having watched The Last Airbender after Tori's recommendation. I think that was like a recommendation that probably started our friendship, I want to say. I don't know. I like among other things, but I feel like that was one of the
like an Avatar shirt and was like, "Oh, it's really great. You should watch it."
Probably. This is in early grad school. So I really enjoyed Airbender for what it was, but the moment that I was exposed to Korra, I love that one infinitely more for all the reasons that Brenda just articulated and in such a beautiful way, right? Like, I think that the storytelling is more mature. I think it's more nuanced. I think the issues that Korra confronts as an avatar are more complicated, and just not to say that like wartime isn't complicated, and then children in wartime and refugees in wartime aren't complicated issues either, because that's something that like Airbender definitely tackles. But the tonality or the tone of Airbender is much lighter than it is in Korra. Korra actually goes dark. Like it is encouraged. Like, I don't think the network encouraged it, but the creators and the writers were definitely encouraged in themselves to go darker with like their storytelling with Korra, because while second season is a dud, like I said, like Korra goes up against radicalists, she goes up against anarchists, she goes up against like political regimes, like, and the dissatisfying part of like all of that is that none of it comes of an easy solution, right? We do get like big battles at the end for season finales, but like the ideologies that are spun out from like the Red Lotus, that are spun out from like the radicalists in the first season, like, and like the second season dude that I can't remember, like all of those ideologies and all Unalog, right? Yeah. Like all of those thoughts and opinions and ideologies are still like current, like they still run through the series, and it's not something that like Korra eradicates just because she defeats the person, right? It's still something that like her naysayers are consistently pushing up against her as like her failures, right? And how like she's a failure as an avatar for those reasons, right? I remember when I first watched this, I was like, oh my God, this is the successor to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Like, I wasn't looking for one, but this is the successor, because in the same way that like Buffy the Vampire Slayer also contended with very nuanced topics and just went there with like the deaths and the deaths that happened to certain characters and the relationships that, you know, were burnt and like ignited through that, and like topics of like addiction and topics of like grief. In the same way that they tackled those topics, I felt also Korra tackled those topics as well, right? In different, not exactly those same topics, but very similarly. Like they weren't afraid to go there, right? And was interesting, what I loved was that like, and maybe love is a strong word, but like love in the storytelling sense, what I loved was that like Korra went through the ringer. Like as much as like Aang goes through the ringer, Aang, you know, there's still such a light tone to that Airbender series that isn't like, he's given some like breathing room in a way that like Korra is not afforded that same luxury.
And Aang isn't held accountable for not fulfilling his avatar duties, whereas Korra does it, and they're like, can you just go away though?
Right. Korra consistently like meets resistance for every action that she does.
Every
right?
action that she does, good or bad.
Like she's constantly put under scrutiny. And, you know, Aang is scrutinized, but he is also afforded a level of like error, right? Because he is the last of his nation, because he is a child, right? Because he hasn't been alive for the last 100 years, so he doesn't have context, right? Like he's given a lot of like room for error, and the same, and that Korra is not afforded that same luxury, which is right. And I think like the way that they wrote Korra in this series actually brings up a lot of interesting topics of conversation with regards to like the portrayal of women characters in like in any kind of fiction, and also like the portrayal of women of color characters in any kind of portrayal, right? And I think, you know, Tori and I, and then Brenda also chimes in, like we've had like heated conversation with regards to like the, you know, the totem pole, like the pedestals that people put Korra and like Aang on, and also like the, you know, the expectations they have of both avatars and how unfair they are, right? And like, I don't know, I feel like a lot of like, I feel like there's so much, like I know that we opened with like this Korra, we're in the minority of loving Korra, right? Like there's so much more love for like Aang versus Korra. Like people don't like the series for whatever reason, or like Korra gets so much hate online, right? And I just don't understand why.
Yeah.
Well, she's a really strong female character, right? And even within the series, right? Like fans aside, but within the series, she gets a lot of people who are like, "Oh, you're not the Avatar enough." And in the same conversation, someone will say, like, "Can you just stop being the Avatar? Like, we don't care." Right? Yeah. And so that same reaction that you see on screen, then you see to people having online, and it's so bizarre to me because ultimately, I think that Korra went through more than Aang did, at least on screen. And I don't say more, sorry, maybe more is the wrong word to choose, right? But she definitely had to confront sexism in a way that Aang never did, right? Aang was protected by his age in a way that Korra never was, right? He was also protected by his gender in the way that Korra never was.
Aang's also nomadic in his entire series, whereas Korra is like locked into, was it Republic City or something city?
Republic, yeah.
Yeah, Republic City. Like she's like, that's her base of operations. Like that's home.
Well, and like, you know, there's always like these discussions of who's the better avatar. Like one is a moot point. They're all the avatar, right? But
here's the thing, being a hero in the middle of a revolution is like, again, it's clear cut, right? It's, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, because no, God, no, it's not easy, right? But the villain is clear, right? There's someone there that you need to overthrow because this system is not working for everyone. Korra has completely different circumstances, right? She's in Republic City. It is an established city. And while it has a lot of issues, all of those issues are systemic, right? And she wants to confront systematic racism, inequality, and all of these things. Confronting that as an avatar is not easy, right? Aang was a figurehead in the way that Korra kind of had to get in there and do the work, right? And so it's all that diplomacy and behind the scenes stuff that's not necessarily exciting, but at the same time she has to do that in order to be lauded as any type of hero, while simultaneously going and confronting people who resent her for having powers, right? Powers that she was just born with. And so I think in that you actually also get some subtext, some queer subtext with her, right? And she's just born this way, she can't help it.
Right.
But here you have this league of people who are saying, no, we don't want you because you have this power and you were born this way, which means you actually weren't born right. And so that becomes such an interesting tension to see, because while she's having to deal with this group of people who hate her for being her, she also has to deal with this city that is fractured. While better than what they had before, it's still not enough to address every single type of inequality that exists within Republic City.
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of the bad guys in Korra make sense. And I think that's another thing. Like the people who want justice for the Benderless, right? Like it's like they're not
because they
wrong.
like, franchised, right?
Yeah.
So that like that
like
kind
the
of
murders are wrong, but their ideology isn't necessarily wrong.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating because
Yeah.
people then also become very protective of the legacy that Aang built, right? Instead, and thinking that that legacy has been epitomized by Republic City. And the reality is, Aang created a structure for evolution and for change, right? But that part of the conversation gets negated and ignored, right? No. It's the thing that he built that we're going to protect, not necessarily the ideology driving that thing that he created, right? And so I think that's actually very, I mean, it's replicated in our own reality, right? People are like very protective of the Constitution. It's like, well, you realize the Constitution was built to create a structure for change, right? So what part are you protecting, which is really, but that's a whole other thing. But I actually think that because we see that in Korra, it's very well written, right, in terms of reflecting our own reality, but also in trying to provide an answer and ultimately saying there isn't one way to create Republic City or this ideal space. But the one thing that we can tell you is that it's messy, it's awful, and a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to be on the wrong side of whoever the winner is, right? And so I think it's a very dark commentary and something that doesn't necessarily exist in Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? There's no space for that gray, right? There's just mostly black and white, and very clear binaries that you don't actually see necessarily in Korra. In Korra, it's all about tackling the gray.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Like Korra lives in the gray, and I liked your earlier point that what Korra is fighting against is systemic, right? It's structural in the way that Republic City was built, and the way that it's being managed by the government, right? And she is working in diplomacy. Like she is more of a diplomatic avatar than any previous avatar. Every previous avatar had more, like, I want to say like agrarian kind of, backgrounds, just feudal backgrounds, right? Like Korra is actually like an ambassador almost, and treated as such, right? And I don't think that that's really existed in the same way that it exists in Korra. Like, yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Like, I think in the past, like the Avatar was revered, but now she's in this modern era where she's revered as, this concept, but she's also challenged in the way that like past avatars have not been challenged before. Past avatars have been challenged physically, right?
And that actually brings up
people want to take their powers, because, but she's being like, she has rhetoric against her, right? That is challenging her.
Well, and it brings up an interesting parallel, because I like the word that you used. She's an ambassador, right? And then when I think about female characters in popular media, I think of female ambassador. I always jump to Wonder Woman first, right? Because there's so many storylines where she is an ambassador, right? And so you see Korra kind of that weird parallel, and I think it speaks to something that these women, particularly Korra and Wonder Woman, are both expected to have that power to be able to fight physically, right? But also, at the same time, while they have this power, they also have to have this other diplomatic identity, right? And you can't be too much of this, but you also can't be too much of that, right? You have to find some kind of middle ground. Whereas with men, that isn't something that is imposed upon. It's not demanded of them, right? Like, you don't expect Clark Kent to go out into the world and create a peace treaty between nations, right? Like, that's not going to happen. That's not something that we expect from them. But we turn around and we expect the same thing from Wonder Woman, right? Same thing with Aang and Korra, right? We don't expect this 12-year-old boy to do that, right? Which would be ridiculous anyway. But we don't expect Aang to be the diplomat. We expect that of Korra, right? And so I think that's problematic, right? And in terms of what it is that we're expecting from our female characters. I'm not saying that they can't do it. They totally can. And we see that in these two characters. I just think the expectation is unfair when it's not for both characters.
I think it gets amplified too when Korra opens up the spirit world. She makes this executive decision to link our world with the spirit world, right? She's like, I have to do this. I have to. And then like spirits are showing up. They're like, fix it, Korra, fix it, Korra, fix it, Korra. And like, yeah, I feel like that happens so much to her. Like, and then they're mad at her for like letting it be a thing. And then they're mad at her for fixing it. It's like, she can't win.
Well, and like this idea of like the expectations of women characters in fantasy is like, it's such an interesting point that like Brenda brought up too, right? Like with the Wonder Woman comparison, like we have that in like Beowulf, right? With Freya Rauru, like her like name literally means like marriage repair or something like that, right? Like she's supposed to weaver, right? Like she's supposed to weave two, warring nations together through marriage, right? Like that's literally her occupation or her character or something.
How messed up is that? This one person is going to bridge two families who have hated each other for years, and all of the responsibility of maintaining that peace falls on this one individual. That's messed up, yeah.
But that has literally been the position of women for like years upon years, right? And it's like, and it's so interesting to see that like while we have gained certain rights and we have gained certain liberties, like we still see that kind of same expectation fall on our fictional female characters in different forms, right? Like with Korra and Wonder Woman and like Diana being expected to play the diplomat but also the warrior, right? And having a different set of morals for some reason, right? And being questioned for like doing the job, right? No one takes Batman to bat about like breaking some guy's bones or like putting down like fights or like his questionable decisions when it comes to like villain capture and his questionable interrogation methods, right? No one questions that in the same way that like we question Diana, which did that like Maxwell Lord, right, on live television. And so again, like I think like we're hitting on an interesting conversation here about like just how much like the gendered expectations that we have upon Korra just because she is a woman, right?
And I do want to be clear though, like it's not that we're not saying that they can't do it, because obviously they can, right? I just like what we're saying is it's unfair to have these expectations, right? That they have to be the diplomatic warrior, because that is having to shift from different parts of our identity, right? While simultaneously asking them to be perfect, right? Like Korra has to be the perfect avatar, but she also has to be the perfect diplomat. And if she fails in reaching that perfection, then she gets a shit ton of hate either within the series or outside of it from the fans.
Yeah, and I think CW
right, and that's so unfair. Right?
Yeah, and I think CW Supergirl said it really well when she said, I'm paraphrasing, so I don't remember the exact quote, but she had said something along the lines of, oh, if Superman fights someone and they blow through a building, he's heroic, but if I do it, I'm reckless.
Right.
Yeah, just like that different sense of like, that lens of just how things are captured based on like someone's gender is
Yeah, it's a total double standard and so unfair and so egregious. So yeah, I'm 100% Team
And I
Korra.
think like another thing we have to consider is just, you know, that layer, another layer of Korra's identity is that she's a woman of color.
Absolutely.
Right? There's literally like a scene in like season 3 where like um we meet Bolin's grandmother. She's never met the Avatar before, and she meets Asami first, and she's like, "Oh my God, Asami!" Like, "Oh my God!" and assumes that she's the Avatar. It's like, "You're as beautiful as they said that you are." Right? And then Asami's like, "Actually, I'm not." Like, Bolin's like, "I'm not." She's actually not the Avatar. This is the Avatar. This is Korra. And then the moment that she sees Korra, she's like, "Oh, you're muscular."
Mm-hmm.
Right? Again, like, and Asami's that traditional beauty, right? She's light skinned, she has long, beautiful raven hair, right? She's tall, she's slender, and Korra is dark. She's muscular because she's been trained to be the Avatar.
Yeah,
And
she
she has
likes
more,
things.
yeah, and she has an indigenous fashion sense.
Does she have her bob in that season?
She doesn't, not
Okay.
yet. Yeah, and she has an indigenous fashion sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And her immediate reaction in that one scene is, "Oh, you're muscular."
Yeah.
Right. And so can we talk a little bit about like the expectations of that, like, and how like that also, you know, that is also another ding against Korra as an Avatar and a woman of color, and she's visually so, right?
So one of the things that, and I think we've seen a lot of think pieces on this, where women of color are particularly called out, unjustly so, for being brash and loud or emotional, right? Like all of these things, right? And for Korra, all of those things are part of what make her such a great Avatar, right? Because it's that passion and it's that willingness to fight for what the people need that makes her a good Avatar, right? And all of those things, those are the things that people are rejecting viscerally, right? It's not just like, oh, whatever, right? It's not just dismissiveness. And a lot of times, in this case, it's a microaggression, right? It's like, oh, you're muscular. But then it manifests itself much more bluntly in like conversations when she's like talking to the police of Republic City, right? In other spaces when she's talking to like political figures, right? They're like, oh no, you don't know any better, right? So she immediately gets dismissed for being a woman, but being a woman of color, right? And if it's not that, then it's for being the Avatar, right? The thing that we don't need anymore, right? Because we've outgrown you. And so sometimes it's very difficult not to ask, have you outgrown the Avatar because the Avatar is a woman now? Or is it because you actually think you don't need a hero anymore? And so I think when Korra is confronting this stuff, it's very difficult as the audience not to ask those questions, right? And I actually don't have an answer for that because I don't think the series ever deals with that, right? But as someone who's watching, I'm like, well, you had no problem with Aang, and you still think of Aang as heroic, right? So is your problem with Korra the fact that she's a woman of color and the Avatar, or the fact that the Avatar is no longer male and white, and or that it's not Asami or someone like Asami, right? So it's very difficult not to have that in the back of my mind as I'm watching Korra and everyone else's reaction to her.
Yeah, and one of the things I did, so a couple years back at ELC, I presented on specifically Korra and Katara, and because I think that so fans eat Katara up, obsessed with Katara. She's drawn differently, right? She's drawn much thinner, no muscle mass whatsoever on Katara. And she fulfills a very stereotypical kind of Mammy Jane role, right? She's this caregiver, this caretaker, and she's also the love interest. Whereas, what was that?
Very gendered.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she literally like heals people with like her water powers. Like it's like how much more feminine trope do you want to get, right? And I mean, what was that?
She's the nurse. Nothing against nurses.
Yeah.
Total hero.
Yeah.
But
I love her as a character. I mean, for me, one of her most defining moments is when she challenges the patriarch in the Northern Water Tribe. Excuse me. But like, that's kind of where it stops, right? Like she challenges and then is allowed to like train with the boys and then like falls back into like traditional female roles within the party. And then, but she's widely loved, right? She's one of like she's a fan favorite, like she really is. And then you pair her against Korra, who has muscle mass. She's got a bit of a temper too, right? She's she's got some like grr to her. And she pushes forward with that, right? And it almost, Korra almost adheres to, right, these like angry woman of color tropes, right? Air quotes there for those listening. Right? And I just find that so fascinating, and I wonder if that's part of why she's been rejected too, because they're both filling stereotypes, and one is air quote preferable, where one is, air quote non-preferable for minority women.
And I think that like Katara is just easily digestible because she's a supporting character, right? And she's fulfilling these very traditional like roles, like as the healer, as the love interest. And so
the peacekeeper.
I love her, and I think she have wonderful moments of growth and wonderful of character, but she also doesn't undergo the same challenge, like she doesn't undergo the same scrutiny as Korra does, right? As a lead character. And we have to contextualize Korra's upbringing too, right? Like Korra was raised to be an avatar. She was trained from that
day
small
one.
toddler, day one, the toddler that came in just punching and like
announced she was the avatar at the top of her lungs, throwing rocks, fire, and water at everyone around her.
For Korra, she has always identified as the avatar. That has never been a question for her. She takes that as like a badge of honor, versus Aang. Aang found out he's an avatar and ran away, and then got buried for 100 years, right? And then his journey in that series is being okay with being the avatar, right? Yeah. And finding a way to like mix his identity as an air nomad with the avatar legacy, right? Korra has never had that sense of like loss. She's never had that conflicting sense of identity. She's always been the avatar, right? And she was trained for it from day one.
So, I think one of the things that you brought up is really interesting. Well, all of it is interesting, but I'm going to pull out one string that you mentioned. Korra has always known that she's the avatar. That is her identity, right? That is something that she grew up knowing, right? And I think when you're thinking about people of color, right, like racial and cultural identity and ethnic identity are always present, right? There's something that is just a part of who you are. It's the way that you breathe. It's the way that you interact with the world around you. And in a lot of cases, and actually in the majority of negative cases, right, it's also the way that the world interacts with you, right? And so you actually see that with Korra. And that's one of the reasons why I think she's a much more interesting character than Aang. It's because you see that tension all the time, right? And that rejection is awful, but it also not also, but it does inform how she reacts to the world and how she's always navigating this, right? And so it creates a really interesting line, right? And I don't know what comedian said this. I was watching it once. I want to say it was Donald Glover, but it might have been someone who works at SNL, whose name I'm blanking on right now. I do sincerely apologize. But where they're saying, they were talking about the differences between being gay and Black, right? And just like, when you're gay, you have to come out, right? You can disclose that to someone, but you don't always have to. You don't have that privilege as someone who is Black, right? Or someone who is a person of color, right? So those are distinct differences. With Korra, we actually have a character who's both, right? She's part of the queer community, but she's also a person of color. And even her queerness, that's actually an interesting conversation that I'm sure we're going to touch on in a few minutes. But and actually it's something that we don't, as an audience, I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't aware that Korra was part of the queer community till probably season 4, literally the last episode. Yes, and the last 5 seconds, right? So that's also fascinating to me, right? Because this entire time we've been seeing the world interact with her because of her because of how she looks and because of her powers, right? And then we add this other layer to her identity, but it was left to the last 5 seconds of the show, as Tori mentioned, right? That almost never actually happened kiss that we all kind of gasped at, but also cheered, but we're also frustrated by, right? I think our reactions to that kiss has also been a huge point of contention for all of us, right? I know we've had numerous heated debates about this. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I'm really mixed and torn on it. There's kind of 2 camps, right? There's the camp that's like, yes, queer representation, we love it, thank you. Like, we understand you had to do it in this way because Nickelodeon had very strict rules on what they'd allow, and you had a dream and you made it happen because, like, restrictions, right? You had constraints. And then there's the other half that's like, you're baiting us. And so I'm torn. Like, I mean, it was apparent how strict Nickelodeon was. The second they stepped out of line, they were pulled off the air and they went to streaming only. So, like, it's just apparent how strict Nickelodeon was, and they kind of were like, we're gonna do it. But part of me is like, okay, if you knew you were gonna take this risk and get pulled off, like, why didn't you go further? But I do understand there are constraints, right? Like, the network said you have to adhere to this checklist and you cannot deviate. And they deviated and they got slapped on the wrist for it.
Well, and those constraints are ridiculous too, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you think about the genre, right? Children's programming is part of how we communicate our public pedagogy and our public ideology to children, right? They learn about our world within the genre, right? So to censor that genre because a character is gay, right? I'm all for censoring children's okay, that actually sounded wrong. My answer is actually a lot more nuanced than that. I'm not for censoring, but what I mean is I understand you can't show some things to children, right? But the idea of you're going to censor a children's programming show because there's a gay character on it, that makes no sense to me, right? Especially when the purpose of children's programming is didactic in nature, right? You have to teach children how to be inclusive and diverse and accepting, right? And I don't say you have to as in like, oh, that's the right thing to do, right? Because it totally is. But in order for them to do well in the world, they have to be able to interact with all sorts of people, right? And so if your purpose is didactic, then it makes no sense to say, oh, we're not going to have Korra on because it's a little bit too progressive. Like that, education is progressive. That's just, it is what it is, right? I don't understand that argument. So I was frustrated with the fact that it was only at the last 5 seconds. On the other hand, I was also really happy. I'm like, oh, Korra and Asami, I can get behind this ship 100% of the time. Like, who is Mako? Who cares? Like, no one cares about you anymore, right, dude? But I can see the argument for it feeling like gay baiting, right? Because it does feel that way, especially because it was treated so last minute and ultimately wasn't actually shown, right?
I didn't feel like they had the build up to it. Like, it just kind of like, I felt like, okay, Asami came in to be direct competition for Korra and Mako, relationship wise, right? It was like she was meant to disrupt the relationship. And then they were like best friends, and then not best friends, and then Korra had feelings, and then Asami also had them, which, I mean, that's fine, but I just didn't feel like, it was like, oh, well, we wrote letters to each other, and I was like, okay, but those letters didn't seem like
Right.
sexual in nature.
There was no build up to the relationship. You're absolutely right. And then when we actually get them, this is the scene that we get, right? And so we have a split screen here. We have an image of Katara and Aang having that final embrace and kissing, and they're happy and they have their arms wrapped around each other. Split with the scene of Korra and Asami walking into, was that
the spirit world? Yeah.
Spirit world? Yeah. So they're walking into the spirit world hand in hand because they're holding each other's hands, I think. Or actually, you can't even tell. It looks like they're about to hold hands, but they're all bathed in light and stuff. And so the idea is that they walk into eternity together. Well, not eternity, but the spirit world together, right? But you don't actually see them embrace. You just see them go in. And so if you are watching this, it's very easy just to say, oh, this is a homosocial relationship. They're just friends. They're just girlfriends. Because you know what? I would go into the spirit world with my bestie just to have fun, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're queer, right? And so a lot of debate has been had about this scene where it feels like it's nice, but it's not actually going all the way. And what I mean by that, it's not actually showing us a queer relationship, right? So much as a friendship, yeah.
It's like, oh, it mirrors Aang and Katara, therefore the same question mark?
Right. And, you know, I want to, you know, circle back to that idea of that bestie, right? Because like, and that lack of lead up, like what we have in the series is like, is the development of a strong female friendship, right?
Yeah.
In season 3, you actually get Asami and Korra, like, actually interacting more, like they are talking more, and like Korra tells Asami, like, it's nice to talk to a girl. I've never really had any female friends before. Like, I was raised in this very military kind of upbringing, and it's nice to do girl stuff, right? And so throughout season 3 and 4, like, Asami is there for Korra, but it's very much billed as a female friendship, right? And like there's like, while that's fine, like there is no indication of this last scene of like, where did this come from, right? Like, right. I think that in a way, I feel like female friendship is also shortchanged for this statement and this imply like really, well, we know it's actually a relationship because of the comic, right? But like, right. I also think that like their development of this couple is, you know, shortchanges this narrative of female friendship and what it leads to, right? Like, now we have this narrative of like female friendship can lead to, and right. It's always lead to, right? And I think that's whereas like with Mako, we got a relationship with Korra. Yeah. We got like her first time in a relationship. We got arguments between the two. We got a breakup between the two. Like,
how we be friends after a breakup.
Yeah. How do we navigate
all that? I think because they hooked up again.
Right. Like, how do we navigate this post-breakup tension that we have, right? Like, we actually get to see that versus what we have with Asami, right? And I think that while I'm here for the Asami Korra relationship, I also think that they didn't handle it that well, right? I think that they did shortchange like female friendships and what that means and like the status of that, and by implying that all female friendships can lead to this, right?
Yeah, and I think it feeds that kind of notion that, you know, women can't be close friends ever, because if they're too close, then they just become lesbians, right?
Yes, exactly. Like you summarized what I was trying to get to, right?
Yeah, like it's I remember hearing that in grad school. One of our instructors in grad school had said something to that nature, where she was like, yeah, I had this really close friend and everyone always thought we were lesbians, because that's just society.
I'm pretty sure people have said that about me with my bestie. So it's one of those things that's just ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
like, of course you can have close female friendships. Of course 2 men can be friends and not have it have to be a thing, right? But in this, I think what's really particularly troublesome with this scene is that you never got that buildup. You didn't see them evolving into something more, right? And so that's, I think, what's so problematic, because then it becomes this, it adds and fuels the conversation or the fear that so many people have with regards to the queer community, right? And it's absurd.
Yeah, and the other thing too is I would have at least liked a scene or something where even if Korra was by herself, like verbalizing it to herself, like, I'm having these feelings, like, do I go through? Do I say something? She's my best friend. Like, what, I like don't understand where these feelings are coming from and what's happening. Or, you know, like, I would have liked to see her come to terms and play with her bisexuality, right? Like this idea of like, am I straight? Am I a lesbian? Am I bi? Am I like, what is my identity, right? I would have liked to see, am I just a sami-sexual? Like is,
Right, like there's like, if like Korra is bi, or if she's just, you know, she's just a lesbian, or she's whatever, a sami-sexual, like you said, right? There, it's that representation and that development was not there, right? Like it's not even handed in the way that we saw with Mako, right? Like with Mako, we saw a straight relationship develop there, and that same luxury was, right, and that same luxury was not afforded to Korra and Asami. And I would even venture to say, like, even Asami as a character, like, I'm gonna take a moment, like, she gets short shafted, like she gets changed. She's a brilliant, like, yeah, she's wealthy, she's part of that 1%, whatever, she's beautiful, you know, all those like things about the like the top 1% minority, right? But she's also a brilliant scientist, engineer, right? She managed to save her father's company and actually make it successful. She's like that awesome Batman character in the series, right? She doesn't have any bending powers, but she's just as powerful on her own. But she gets shoehorned into this position of, one, the competition, two, the female friend, confidant, and then three, the love interest at the end. So there is no development on her side.
And again, those are the, like, all the things that you're imposing on, and all the expectations that we impose on female characters, right? They have to be a competition while simultaneously being the confidant, while simultaneously being this brilliant scientist, while simultaneously being X, Y, Z, whatever, right? And so I think that's one of the things that we see, again, not just, and I hadn't thought about it till you brought it up right now, Jen, because I always say, yeah, that's exactly what happens to Korra, but you're absolutely right. It happens to Asami too, and it's so unfair. And, you know, I think one of the things that happens is the danger of how we imagine Mako must have reacted to them walking into the sunset together, right? He must have felt like, oh shit, that's fucked up. You know, like my two exes are hooking up now. You know, did I turn them? Like all those ridiculous questions, right? Then actually become a reality on this show. And I think that's what part of what's so problematic about the way that this relationship was presented, right? I'm all here for it, and I totally ship those two. I don't care for the way that it was handled on the show, right?
And
because it feeds into the homophobia that our current political and social climate finds itself in, right? And that's problematic at its core, right? The fact that it wasn't part of their character growth, right? And if it was, we didn't see it on screen. We weren't privileged to that information. Because again, it's a show. You're right. It wasn't something like she wasn't having a conversation with herself in her head, or we didn't even see the letters, right? Or like, you could have done a clear voiceover, right? Where Korra's like has the letter in her hand and Asami's reading it to her, right? Like that would have been such a simple way to kind of go about that, to have this feel a little bit more real and a little bit more authentic, but they didn't. And that's disappointing.
And I felt like there was more chemistry, even though she was younger than her, with Aang's granddaughter, the oldest one, she shaved her head and had the arrow done.
Janora.
Yes. I felt like they had like infinite, like more like understanding and chemistry with one another than like Korra did with Asami, like in terms of like identity and sexuality. Like I just felt like, you know, they like, I don't know, I felt like a more connection there. And I also felt a really strong connection with Asami and Bolin, actually. I felt like they really had a lot of moments together, and I was like,
yeah, I remember feeling the same way with regards to Bolin and Asami. I don't know that I felt that way with Janora, but I definitely felt that way.
I wasn't sure, like, if, like, I just felt like they were trying to build something up with the two of them and then dropped it. I don't know if it was like sexual, if it was just friendship, because like she was like getting really close to her and then like it just kind of stopped.
Is Janora like hella younger though?
Yes, but then they like age, right? Like, 'cause at the beginning she's like what, 10, and Korra's like what, 16, and then by the end she's like 15, and Korra's like 20-ish.
I
Maybe.
don't
I
like.
Well, not
I don't like. I didn't see that with Janora and Korra. Like I saw more like a little sister and
don't know. Okay, that's
sister,
fair. Yeah.
like a mentor. Like I think like Janora fulfilled like more wise. Like we always have that wiser younger sibling. I think
Yeah.
that's like Janora feels because she was
That's fair.
obviously more connected to the spiritual realm than Korra was, right? Like I think in a way, in the same way that like Toph is younger than Aang and is a master over earthbending, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
I think Nora is just that master over the spirit world that
Right.
teaches Korra, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see that, but I definitely saw like this Sami Bolin thing a little bit, right? Like in these
Yeah.
like, will they like in this comedic kind of structure potential romance, right? But they
Right.
went with the Mako route, right? Because he's the handsome one.
Right. And like,
Okay, so and that's fat phobic in its in nature. Just so can we just put that out there? Because I love Bolin.
I
He was
love
a cute
Bolin.
character.
I
I
love
love
Bolin.
Bolin. He's
I
awesome.
thought he was cuter.
But while we're on the topic of phobicness, right? I think what we see here with Korra is that biphobia that we see a lot of
Yeah.
in popular media, right? This idea that if a character is bi, then they're sexually promiscuous, right? And oh, look out for that girl because she's gonna steal your girl, right? And that's so messed up, right? And that's one of the reasons why I brought up like if you're a male audience member watching it as Mako, right, then you're going to be terrified about this. And that's it. Well, I understand that wasn't the intent, the show creator's intention. I feel like that is an inevitable consequence, and that's one of the things that I hope creators are a little bit more cognizant of and sensitive to, right, when presenting bi and queer characters, right? Be aware of the circumstances and the fears around this community and try to create a narrative that doesn't feed into those fears.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that it's been on my mind lately because it happened in Sailor Moon Crystal, is the mirrorings, right? The mirrorings of Aang and Katara and Korra and Asami, because Sailor Moon Crystal was doing that with Chibi Moon and Saturn, right? This kind of mirroring, but they at least like confirmed it a little more, in my opinion, in Sailor Moon, right? Because like they actually exchange I love yous. And but then like their reasoning also was like, I mean, these characters are both super young, so they didn't want to sexualize them. And I was just wanting, like seeing that made me just want more out of like Korsami as a ship, right? Like I just wanted more. Like I just wanted to see like something verbalized or like yeah.
And I think we are coming down hard on like the lack of build up for that relationship and I think the missteps they took in terms of demonstrating or portraying a bisexual character, if that's what Korra identifies as, right? But I think it did open doors for other series, right? Like I think that Korra, that last game, like that last 5-second, like F you to the network, right? Opened the door for like, I think Toy said like She-Ra, right?
Yeah.
At least that's what you're like.
Yeah. I think it shattered the glass ceiling for Voltron, which shattered the next glass ceiling for She-Ra, is my kind of theory on it. Like it was like these kind of baby steps right into getting it to happen, because it was like, okay, we're gonna imply this heavily in the last 5 seconds of the finale, and then was it Shiro in Voltron, who is like, he gets like a whole episode, we're like, okay, he's gay, and then he gets a gay wedding at the end, and then she was like, hold my beer. And then
Well, I mean, yes, you're right. I do think that it was progressive in that regard, right? Because the network didn't want it, right? And I think that, again, that's not necessary. That's as much as the show creators can do within the spectrum of the show, because they still have to be held accountable to the network. And if the network's not progressive and supportive, then that happens, right?
mm-hmm.
But I think that also brings up an interesting conversation about discovering one's queer identity, right? Did we see that in Korra?
No.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think,
so
you know,
go ahead, sorry.
like I think the creators, you know, relied on that female friendship development, right? They which then, you know, they relied on then the epistolary letter writing model as well, right? Which was very epistolary letter, which is the model, which is letters, right? Is something that, you know, in the past was used between female friends to like talk, you know, communicate with one another before the internet, right? The internet didn't exist back then. So, you know, the epistolary model is seen heavily in a lot of female relationships and friendships in like 17th century, 18th century like works. So I think that like the creator
female genre, right?
Yeah. Definitely think the creators relied heavily on that, but I also think they shortchanged the history of that, right? In favor of like this ending, right? And it's like, well, and I don't think they did it well on both parts, right? they didn't do the female friendship thing well, or the epistolary model well, and then they didn't do the coming out well, right? Not to say that like, and I think that's harsh too, right? Like, not to say that every coming out needs to be perfect, right? Like, every coming out is what it is for that person and that individual, and it's beautiful in that way. But I think that for what they were trying to do, because they had an agenda there, you know, the product wasn't there because the development wasn't there. Right. Yeah. I think that got short shifted on both ends.
Because they chose to make the statement. Like they were like, this is our time is now or never. Like
right. They made a statement but they didn't do the work for that statement.
Right.
Or they're kind of like that. It's that one paper, right? Like, oh, well, this is kind of related, right? I'm going to use evidence that's kind of related to this statement or this paper topic, and I'm just going to see how it goes, right?
The abstract almost matched, therefore it will be
an ally, but that's it, right?
Yeah.
Doing enough work to earn the title of an ally, right? Or
yeah.
I mean, I think but yes. So I think the queer issues were not handled well, and yet so much of the rest of the series was done pretty decently, right?
And when you compare it, I do want to compare to She-Ra briefly, because She-Ra and Catra are friends, but there's always that subtle implication that Catra wants something more. She does not want to share Adora with anyone under any circumstances. Like, and that's the kind of base thing I was wanting in Korsami, right? This idea that I don't want to share you with anyone else, right? Like I don't know if this is like a sexual thing yet, but I know that it bothers me when you talk to Mako, because like I want you for me, or something.
And, you know, and that like attraction isn't something that can grow over time, right?
Right.
I also don't believe the idea that you're just when you're attracted to someone it instantly happens, right? Like sometimes you may not initially be attracted to a person, but as you get to know them, you become more attracted to their personality, and that can happen, right? You just didn't see that in Korra.
And you know, I think what it's important to understand too and to contextualize is that Asami didn't to begin with, so any development or any interaction with Korra was already limited. Like Asami spent a lot of the series, you know, working with Mako or working with Bolin, working with other characters, right? The times that she did get to work with Korra and talk to Korra were very far and in between very few scenes, right? There were very distant between scenes. And so that's the difference is that like on She-Ra, like you see Katra and Adora consistently butt heads, like almost every episode or every other episode. You just saw more interaction between the two. With Asami and Korra, you rarely got to see that. It's very light interaction. And those moments of interaction were seated in, like, it's great to have a girlfriend that I can finally have these conversations
and
with.
I can talk to about my relationship with.
Right. And like, because Korra is more comfortable talking to Bolin and Mako on just the action of things, right? Of like, you know, boxing, what like the equivalent of boxing in that world is like bending.
What is that game they play?
Pro bending, is it?
Pro bending, yeah.
Like they're athletes too, right? Like they're sports people, so like they can talk to each other on that level. But like Asami is just a different level of conversation that we don't get to see either. Yeah. Because I think Asami does bring a level of refinement and culture and just that aristocratic background into conversation with Korra that like Korra has no exposure to. And that's even an interesting thing to think about, right? But again, we don't get many scenes of them, right? And so when that ending came, yay!
But you're right. Yay with a big question mark. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being shocked, like just being like, what? Like.
Well, I remember, like, I didn't watch it live, so I watched it after the fact, right? And I think I remember like texting you, Tor, saying like, so wait, or like texting Tor, or like looking up on the internet, are they together? Because I didn't see that coming. I was like, I was so confused.
Well, and to be fair, we know that the series does continue in graphic novel form, right? And in the graphic novel, they are together. But part of the problem with that is the audience for this, you know, the audience that you get on TV or streaming is always going to be bigger than the audience that you get in book form, right? Because, you know, book consumption is not as ravenous as TV consumption.
Absolutely. It's apparent with Power Rangers. People are like, oh, I can't read Shattered Grid. It's a book. And how, God forbid.
Well, and see, that's the problem, right? I think that's the thing that we're calling out, right? And why we want it to be on TV. And that's actually going to be a big area of discussion for us next week when we're touching on our next subject. But before we move on, before we sign off, I do want to give a few moments to our discussion of Avatar, the live version, right? The live production and the audience reactions to that.
The movie, the M. Night Shyamalan one, or the Netflix one that's supposed to be coming out is out? Question mark.
Coming out. Coming out. Hasn't been out yet.
So the M. Night Shyamalan one, I think.
Ooh.
I didn't watch it. I just heard it was not great.
I walked out of the theater.
Oh, wow.
So what happened, Tori?
It just was bad. I know who the guy who plays Aang. I've competed against him in martial arts. So I know who he is. Yeah, he's really good at bow. He's like international grand champion in bow. Like, I mean, I don't know him personally, but like I've seen him on the competing circuit because they scouted him specifically for the movie. And so I was like, oh, like I know who this guy is, right? Like I wasn't like, oh, hey, I'm a good job on the movie, like, but like I know who he is, and so I went to go see it, and I like could not. I mean, the bow was great, but like I could not. I was like,
it was on TV the other day on Telemundo, and so I was like, I don't know, I think I was making a sandwich or something, and the TV was on, and I turned around and I looked at it, and I'm like, oh, that looks like waterbending. That's funny. And then they said Katara in Spanish, right? And I turned around, and so it caught my eye. I'm like, wait, is this Avatar? And yeah, so I sat down and I watched a little bit of it, and it was bad. It was just not well acted. It wasn't well scripted.
It wasn't well cast.
It wasn't. I didn't watch enough to tell you whether or not it was well cast, but the little bit of acting that I did see, it wasn't great. Katara's a woman of color, yes? Why was the actress white?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was problematic. It wasn't great. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't watch it, to be honest. I saw a few minutes of it, and then as soon as a commercial break hit,
There's
I got up and
another
left.
live action for it on Netflix.
Yeah.
Mixed feelings about.
I'm looking forward to that version, but I'm also, given the legacy of live productions, I'm also very hesitant.
Fair. I think Netflix has had a good reputation for adaptations, right? I think that it's not going to be the light show that we're used to, right? Like, I think that Netflix shows definitely have a certain level of tone. Like, every Netflix show has the same tone to me, like very dark, very gritty, kind of a think piece maybe kind of tone. So I feel like Avatar is going to fall under that. And for that reason, I think it's not going to have the same love that people have for the original.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a different beast, and it's okay that it's a different beast because, She-Ra was a reboot of the 80s, and that did phenomenally well, right? And so I'm for, I can't believe 4 reboots, right?
I think we all, and I don't know about you guys, but I feel like all three of us have the same thing when we engage reboots. We're always cautiously optimistic, right? Yeah. Because we wanted to do well, but I remember before Wonder Woman came out, we had seen Green Lantern, and that was awful. We saw Suicide Squad, and we're like, oh, right? And then Wonder Woman was coming
Batman
out.
versus Superman.
Oh, that was awful. Bat Trump was awful. But then going in and watching Wonder Woman, we're like, okay, we'll see. I don't know. I remember at one point I did a presentation on Wonder Woman because I was preparing for my thesis, and someone asked me, well, how do you feel about the movie? And I remember saying the same things, like, well, it looks great in the trailer. We'll see. And then I was really happy with it. So I really hope that that's the case in this situation. But remakes are always kind of that really, do we have to? But I kind of really want it to be great kind of feeling.
I think, like, for me, like, it would be interesting to see. I actually am now thinking about that reboot and my discussion about, like, the tone of Netflix shows. Like, I think Korra would be a really good reboot for Netflix because it would engage, like, it's already dark, and Netflix likes those things. Anyways, I think those two kind of styles would mesh very well with each other. And I think if we were to get a reboot of Korra in live action, I would want them to explore that relationship with Asami.
Yeah. Yes, early on.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one of the ways that they can improve upon the animated show, is to actually, because I think Netflix would probably be a little bit more open to the idea.
Yeah, I think so.
Right, given that, like, that was the intention, and so I think fans will want to see that more visually and vividly on screen if it was a live action preview. I think it deserves one. I think it's actually, like, the topics are relevant. It's actually it's gonna, in the same way that, like, people like Westworld, in the same way that people like the other dystopian, The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu. Like, I think that Korra could potentially be your, like, next series that fulfills that dystopian kind of slot very well.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah. I'm holding out still for a sequel with the next Avatar. It's probably never gonna happen, but my dream is Avatar twins. One has all the Avatar power stuff from, was it Vanu or Rava, the light one? And the other twin has all the dark ones. Because that one kind of got unologged or whatever. I don't remember really. But, like, I want a dark twin and a light twin. And I want the dark twin to have all the sub-bending. So no water bending, but blood bending. No fire bending, but thunder. And then metal, lava, all that fun stuff. I think it would be really fun.
I think we all just want more Avatar for sure. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that this was fun. And any final thoughts on Korra?
Despite its missteps, it's a good show. Like, it tackles a lot of big relevant topics, and the animation is great. It's fantastic. So I would go watch it for the story, go watch it for the animation, and it's, give it a chance. Go watch it.
Yeah, like she won't be the queer powerhouse you want her to be, or the queer icon you're hoping she'll be, that you might have heard from friends on the internet saying, oh, she's queer, she's queer. It's got some issues there, but it's a great story. And I mean, technically she's in the realm of bisexualness, so there is that. But she won't be the queer icon you're not like She-Ra or other characters that have.
I think she was definitely a step in the right direction.
And she's years before.
What was that?
Oh, and she's years before, right? So it's like before all the progressiveness started happening, she was really like the first step. Like it's very limited because of that first step.
And I mean, definitely problematic in nature, right. But all the other things that she tackles, like the racism, the colonialism, the corruption within government, and how difficult it is to weed that stuff out, right? And what the process is like, I think, is a worthwhile show, right? So all the problems are kind of part of the package deal. And that's actually, I think, part of what makes Korra such a good show. So I do definitely recommend it. So for next week, we are going to be discussing Halo from Young Justice. Well, what was the subplot of Young Justice? Young Justice what?
Outsiders.
Thank you. I was going to say outsiders for some reason. So yes, Young Justice Outsiders, that is streaming on DCU on the app. So make sure to watch that, or just listen to us next week. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. And stay safe, everyone. Wear your mask outside.
Bye.